Hello, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River in Southern Oregon with the Secret of Light discussion group. Today, we're going to be covering Alice Bailey. This is part 2 of Rule 7. We've covered part 1, which was actually more about the battlefield of the astral plane, and we're going to talk a little bit about the planes of existence and how they coordinate with other religions and with other cosmologies. But today we actually are going to think about synchronicity also, because as we did these talks 2 weeks ago, quite a few of our community came out with similar talks that wasn't coordinated, but I know that Gigi Young talked a bit about the astral plane and what goes on there. And I know that Bear Lando did also about how it's kind of, the topic last week was the astral plane, the battleground, of the spirit, and this is where we talked about how as we get into the astral plane, this is where, as we sleep, as Steiner said, this is where we have our dream world, how this is a different world where it's almost like the crossroads of sentience, where all beings come and communicate and interact within this astral plane. And that was what we were talking about last week, was that this was the battleground of this area. And so today we're actually going to talk a little bit about the two paths. So I'm going to start and continue. Does anybody have any questions about the astral plane or what I was just talking about being the battleground? Okay, so we're going to look again, this is a treatise on white magic, rule 7, part 2. Part 1 was the battleground of the astral plane. This is called the two paths, but we're also going to cover the 3 planes, which is the physical plane, the astral plane, and the mental plane today, which is what we're going to look at and how those relate to the different physical planes and within the different cosmologies that we're going to talk about. So rule 7 is the dual forces of the plane whereon the vital power must be sought. But we're talking about, the astral plane are seen. The two paths face the solar angel. The solar angel is our soul. The poles vibrate. This is the poles of duality, which is positive and negative, which we've talked about many times, and that is what causes our physical reality. Where the two paths face the soul, the poles vibrate. A choice confronts the one who meditates. So again, within the treatise on white magic, this is I would say it's kind of the idea of a mystery school in a book. It is kind of telling people how they can actually begin to access the different aspects of their subtle bodies, as we would call them. We can call them the planes of existence also, but within that, man is not just a physical body. He is made up of these different subtle bodies, emotional bodies, spiritual bodies, mental bodies, and we're going to talk more about that today. But the one who meditates, as he begins to meditate and reflect, as Alice Bailey says, back on the man that is sheathed in food, or his personality, which is the avatar that walks the earth and that we all think we are, then that is not really our existence. We also have a higher self, which she calls the solar angel. And the idea is that instead of trying to invoke the lower man, which is the man that has just experiences feelings and physical sensation, we actually bring the soul down into the body and begin to experience life through our soul rather than just our physical bodies, which is on the physical plane of existence. So when I'm putting together the collage, as everyone knows, I do this each time to kind of have some ideas and pictures of what we're going to talk about. It's like setting the table before we begin to actually eat. We're going to look at some of these pictures and begin to absorb the images. And then we're going to go into discussions. And we're going to wander a bit because since this was only the second half, but I think it's really important that we do talk about these planes. They do differ based on the different cosmologies. There's different names for them. Like I said, within biogeometry, Ibram Karim's calls them the planes of nature, which is based on more of a Egyptian uh, dialectic. And what Bailey talks about is really more of the Vedic dialectic, meaning that it comes from the Hindus and Bhagavad Gita and Theosophy, which comes a lot of that out. We covered a little bit on the Christian, which is really more of a Steiner bent. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about the Norse bent today, about how the Norse saw how these planes worked out and how they called them. And today with Marvel movies and things like that, and with anybody who's watched any of the Thor movies, they talk quite a bit about that. We're going to show what that was. Earlier, we were talking about some of us here actually snore, and I don't know if people realize it, but that was called Odin's curse, was snoring. Because if you were a warrior and you were out in the field and you began to snore, you were dead. The enemy could sneak up on you, knew exactly where you were. So that was called Odin's curse. So we're going to talk a little bit about Odin and Norse mythology today. So let's look at the collage we have here. So let's concentrate over here on the left-hand side. And this is really more of it's not a total theosophical idea, but it is a kind of, I liked it because it was broken up in stages, and it also kind of had pictures of what these planes represent. So on the very bottom plane, we'd have the physical world. This is the world of the earth, of our 3D reality, as we would call it. This is where we manifest forms and solids that we would call, mass, matter. It would come on this. And then they broke the astral plane, which is the plane that we're talking about today, into 3 different planes. So the lower astral is really the idea of the spirits and the dead. The middle planes is kind of the idea of man and home. And the higher astral plane is the idea of, say, the golden mean, the higher self within the plane itself. Then we have the mental plane. So the mental plane comes above the astral plane. And so we're going to talk today about these 3 planes right here, the physical, the astral, encompassing all 3 of these ideas, and the mental plane. And then within this cosmology, we also would have the Buddhic plane, which is where Jesus and Buddha and all the ascended masters would reside. And above that, we'd have the Atmic plane, which is the monad and so on, which is above that. Again, there's different ideas. This has colors on it. These colors are much different than some of the other colors that we're going to use, because a lot of times it's said that within the body, the chakras that we have, we see this figure of a person here where, this would be the physical, this would be the astral, and so on. And it would move up into the mental planes and the higher planes. So, again, one thing that we're going to concentrate on quite a bit within the coming months and years going forward is color, sound, and sexual polarities, as talked about within Rusolian and within Reichian. And we may take a break and actually do a little Reichian just to get that under our belts before we move on with Alice Bailey, because we're actually going to be getting more into white magic with Alice Bailey in the next set of rules. And with that concept of those rules of white magic, I just would like to repeat what Alice Bailey defines as white and dark magic, or black magic. So white magic would be any type of magic or manipulation of the physical ether or other planes that would be from the soul. So as long as we are working from our soul or our higher self, that would be called white magic, and black magic would be any magic that we would concentrate on our lower selves or our personality. So through the solar angel or our soul is how we would work white magic, our higher self, which is not concentrated on selfish or personal greed or means, to where if you do concentrate on those aspects, which we would call the personality or the avatar on the ground, that is what she considers black magic. So we see the planes of existence here, that we see the idea of the body and the chakras corresponding to these planes. We have a picture here that is from Walter Russell's Cosmic Clock, which relates to very much the same aspects of how this works within his cosmology and within what we'd call the universal octave, that colors and sounds correspond, but also to elements. And this is how we create within the vortex as we bring things denser and denser into matter. This is how we get the inert gases that go into the higher elements or more dense elements. And this is through looking at also the cosmic clock. This is the idea of the two paths right here, where we have man, and he's going to have a choice between the two paths, which we're going to talk about today. We're going to identify what the two paths are and what choices we need to make on what path we want to follow. And this was just a kind of a Byzantine art piece from a Greek Orthodox, but it actually was based on these planes of existence from which they have also. So the ideas of these subtle planes or subtle bodies and different planes of existence are in all cosmologies or religions or, you know, theosophy type structures. And so this is something that has been lost in recent times once we got the divergence of spirituality and physicality back in the early Renaissance, when we began to get science brought in and we broke off spirituality as a separate component to physicality. And so I really think that this is something that we need to concentrate on, is that we do have these other bodies and begin to work with our other bodies, because as we're going to learn here, as Bailey speaks to us, that that is how we actually can grow and begin to accomplish some of the higher aspects of the human. Any comments before I move on to the actual discussion?
Why are you so fucking serious?
Because you weren't here early.
Oh, that's no excuse.
Okay.
Lighten up, man.
Okay. Thank you, Doug.
Okay.
I like the one on the Persian because that it shows the energies of you know, the planets or the signs, and you can see there's, I think it's probably like Zoroastrian there, like Zarathustra or something. Yeah, the astrology is getting big again. I mean, and well, anyway, I like that picture.
The one at the bottom middle?
Right here?
Under the text. Yeah,
Yeah, right here. This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked it too. It's very much like an alchemical drawing.
Yeah, it's cool. What is it?
It's just it's a draw. It's kind of like a Byzantine drawing from a Greek Orthodox, actually.
Are those letters?
Yeah, these are symbols and letters that correspond to the planets and so on. I don't know what they all mean, but I was checking that out. Okay, so again, before we get started too much, I really do want to cover these planes, because I think, you know, that as we talk in this portion, the ideas of the subtle bodies and the planes, because there are many kind of definitions. They're all basically similar, but they do have different correspondences. And what I really want to get across here is how important this was in ancient times, that people knew this, and it's really been forgotten in current times. And that, you know, there is no one way to see it, but there is many ways to see it, but they all are very similar. So, you know, I'd rather look at some of the similarities and try to concentrate on differences, because they are within the same paths. So I pulled up a couple of different concepts here. This was one that was had to do a little bit more with the idea of what natural sounds corresponded to the planes of existence, which then would correspond also to the chakras, as I pointed out earlier in the first drawing. So within this, it was showing the physical dimension, which was the mantra was alaya, right? So if you're chanting, the sound was thunder and drums. So this is like, if you're having the idea of what sound would correspond to the physical plane, this would be the thunder, right? Because that's what's being generated on the earth itself. So this actually, and this would almost correspond to Thor within the Nordic mythology. The next idea is the causal dimension, which sometimes talked about, but isn't. It's actually part of the astral dimension also. So within the causal body would be the sound for clinging bells. So oftentimes you'll see, like with tarot readers or other things, mystics, they'll ring bells prior to kind of clear the space. The mental dimension, the sound is flowing water. I know that we've had some discussions in our group this week about flowing water and how the flowing water has its own unique sound. And this idea here is that that actually is part of the mental plane. The next is the etheric dimension, in which he talks about. This is not what Bailey talks about. This is just kind of its own. And that would be the sound of humming. And then the next is a soul dimension, is a stark wind. And then the top would be the sound of music of the universe, or what Goethe and some of the others would say, the sound of the spheres. And again, this is really not to say that, you know, this is any one or the exact interpretation of the planes. It just shows that there was correspondence between planes and sounds. We're going to talk about this astral dimension right here today. And it's funny because, you know, as we looked at those lower astral planes was the area of, you know, the dead or the dying. And this is kind of what they're showing here, that within this plane is where the spirit world may reside for those that are deceased. But also it has the UFOs. So that's a different dimension. And whether or not, you know, aliens are from other planets or their future selves or just interdimensional beings, that's another discussion that we're not here to have today, but just to show that that's where some of that activity resides. And that's when we listen to Gigi Young, that's what she actually talks about a bit too, is that within this astral plane is where all this resides. Below this,
cat purring in there?
any cat, well, I would say that cat purring would be part of this plane here, because like I said, I know within biogeometry that the cat purring is what actually transmutes the negative lines.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, I look on it.
The negative energy line. So it would probably be within this dimension. Now below here is kind of a drawing showing what Russell was talking about, where the keys on the piano and the notes, the also corresponded to color and to sound. Then here we have an idea of these different planes, where we have the physical, we have the astral, the causal, the Akashic, the mental, the Buddhic, and the messianic. And with that, we actually have kind of like the server, or the aspect that would portray. So in the physical, you would have the server, the astral would be the artisan, the causal would be the warrior, the Akashic would be the scholar, and the sage, and so on. And then corresponding to that is all the different universal laws that would correspond to those. And also, this is closer to the idea of the chakras within the body and how the colors align. And then here's the real one that's probably more within the theosophic tradition, which is the physical, the three astrals, the mental, the Buddhic, and the Atmic. Any questions on kind of the planes within these cosmologies of theosophy and how they relate to the chakras in the body?
William, where is this table with the correspondences of the roles, and where is this coming from, and the planes?
Right,
yeah, that one.
This one, this is really just came from a different poster, different person that was kind of showing what he thought were these ideas. But I thought it was because within this, this is very similar to the theosophy model, but where it has this Akashic as a level, that's not really shown here. That's really would be the heart level that we've talked about, and so on. So
it's green though. Wouldn't it be in the green?
Yeah, the green is here, the heart level.
And what's the green on the outside then?
But that's where
I got
that would be the biofield that Eileen McCusick talks about.
Sorry, I get it. The chakras,
well, and it's also the toroidal field, right?
Yes.
The chakra is basically the center of the toroidal field that holds these energies that would then radiate outside our body in 3D.
So they, like, each chakra relates to those other circles.
Correct. And that's the idea that of the auric field, that the auric field is really just the toroidal field of the chakra being cast out from the body.
What's a server?
A server would be like someone who does service. That would be someone that would help somebody. So the idea is that the
They have
idea with,
service also, though.
huh?
They have service, isn't that
But
service?
that's the, if you look up here, it says role,
Ah,
and then plane, and then path, and then attribute,
well, that's deep. Yeah, got
and
it.
then the laws. So I really liked it. I mean, it kind of went through, that these kind of different concepts, that was a little bit deeper. And like I said, what I really want to happen here is we begin to talk about this in Bailey, because to me, it's very confusing because each different person you listen to, whether it be Steiner, Kareem, or Bailey, or Theosophy, or even, they all might throw their own little spin on it or different words on it. So it's kind of nice just to get an overall understanding maybe of the basic concepts that align and go with that. That's why I kind of threw this up for.
And it seems like and you're saying they all link together too, like the keys on the
Yeah,
piano.
yeah.
It's like
Well,
everything is everything. I mean, they all link. If
yeah.
it's red here, it's related to the red there.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
right?
Exactly. And, Bailey, we talked about maybe 4 weeks ago, she didn't really get into the colors because she said they differ so much and so on. And it's hard. But when I was speaking with Bear this week, he really likes the colors and has distinct colors. And we may go over what his thoughts are on the colors and the keys and so on. But this, when we did the talk on Russell with the universal octave, which a lot of people viewed now, I mean, I've almost got 1,000 views on that video we did. The idea of how all this relates and then relates back to the elements and the inert gas that we talked about. And what I'm trying to show here is all this interlinking, that there is really no one exact path. And they all talk a bit about, but to bring everything into one slide like this is kind of nice because you get to see it all rather than just hearing the words in different sources that are separate and don't really make much sense. So any more questions on this slide before I move on? All right. So as I talked about earlier, we talked about thunder and Thor's realm. We talked about Odin's curse. This is really the Yagdrasil, which is the Norse theory of how the world works. And I don't know if many people have seen this or not, but the idea is that they have their levels. So Midgard is the world of humanity, so that would to the physical. Asgard is the world of the tribe of gods and goddesses. Vanaheim is the tribe of gods and goddesses also, Vanir. So these are different gods and goddesses. Just so we talked about how there's maybe different hierarchy of beings or angels within these different planes. Jontime is the world of giants. This is what they call the ice giants in the Marvel series. Nephilim, the primordial world of ice. Then you have the primordial world of fire. Then you have Elfhelm, which is the world of the elves. Nidavellir is the world of dwarves. What's this sound like? Does it sound very Tolkien? This is where Tolkien really got a lot of his book from, in the idea of Midgard or Middle Earth and so on and so forth. So a lot of that book was kind of taking this cosmology and sequence and beginning to develop a story from it. And then we have
up with the Kabbalah thing, though.
Exactly. That's this is my point, Doug. They all are kind of just different interpretations of the same information, and that's why I don't get real caught up in what each different religion says, because they really are just a language that relates to that tribal custom of the people that did it, or it may be actually also to the climate and the area they were in. And so the last one is Hel, right? Hel, which is the area of the dead, which relates back to hell and the underworld and everything else that we saw. And as Doug said, this looks like the Kabbalah, the tree of life, right? Which is very similar, with Midgard being in the middle here, Asgard, Alfheim, and so on, and hell being the lower. So I just wanted to bring this in so that as we begin to talk about this, I would prefer that people don't just get stuck on Bailey's concepts of the planes, that there are different concepts of the planes, and this is just one interpretation for this book. Any questions or comments on the idea of the Norse or the Yggdrasil, the world tree?
If you ever look at Archaics, Brashear, I mean, he actually, in his chronology that he does, explains how these all fit together, all the different ones. Pretty wild stuff. And he absolutely shows how it's all the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Enki and
Mm.
the other one. What's that one with the N? And Enoch.
Yeah.
Enki and Enoch are the same person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's
And,
what-
yeah. And so, I mean, that's what I really would hope that people begin to see, though, that we do have this similarity running through all of these ideas, and it was just interpreted or brought into physical form with writing or whatever,
well,
based
it's
on
used as a control feature as well, possibly.
yeah. Well, but at least it was an idea. I mean, whoever took these things, that was really what we'd call the interpretation of the ideas and concepts. So now
Gotcha.
well, go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, with regards to these different worldviews and cosmologies, would you say that it would be helpful if, when you're also trying to work with the land and the local spirits and elements, that it helps to take one worldview that culturally is most connected to the history of the land there? Do you think that can be helpful?
I would think that, like you said, you're in a Norse area, right? I mean, kind of where you are now.
It's between bit Celtic, Germanic,
Yeah.
and Norse.
Yeah. But yeah, so like most of the Norse, was Germanic in a sense. I mean, they had a lot of that, and the Celts have their own also. So I would say that whatever wants, I don't think it's as much as, because you're the manifester, right? So you're going to manifest and relate to what you feel best. I would say, for me, like I'm here in an area in Southern Oregon where it's more, like the primary people that were here were indigenous, Indians, and so on. Thinking about how their culture was and how maybe the land would have me relate to it in the sense of the trees, because like here, I have the mother madrone on my property. If you look at the Anastasia book, it's the ringing cedars, because those are the trees that were sacred trees to both of those cultures. So so in my opinion, that look at what was sacred to the indigenous people, and
I have a huge ash tree here. It's the Yggdrasil, and both the Celts and the Norse have this sacred tree. Yeah.
So yes, I would think that because that's where those spirits in those areas chose to reside or chose to incarnate and speak from those areas.
Great, thank you.
Ken, I wonder if there's maybe some synchronicity with the colors too that are involved.
It may be. I mean, we have sulfur here, which is the Vanheim, the fertility gods. Green is earth. I mean, so I don't know. Again, like I said, don't get too caught up in the colors, because it could be an artistic selection versus a true. It could be an artistic license being taken.
But there is a lot of color.
Yeah, exactly.
And I also happen to think that a cedar tree is reddish, as is my drone, also reddish.
Which would be the root chakra, yeah.
Just tossing that out.
Any more comments before I move on?
Well, I'm thinking when I went to Finhorn in 2012, I mean, I met a lot of Celtic people there. There was a lot of people that came from all over the world, different stream, but I don't know where Holland is, but I know that I read a lot about the Celts as well, because here in Canada, we have a lot of people from Scotland, and I was from the East, where the Scottish on my dad's side. So I'm just saying, I don't know the Netherlands, for example. So, but the Celts, yeah, for some reason, I read a lot about the Celts in the past.
In the lower part of the country, it's really through the middle that the Celtic tribes flowed over into the Germanic tribes that were more higher. And I think it's also part of the migration routes or the traveling routes, let's say from the north over the sea. So the first place they land is on the top of the country, while from the bottom, it's like people on foot from France and, that area. So I think, and apparently from what I read is that it also mixed a lot in this area. So they took aspects of both and they interbred and things like that. So it's really like, it's not like a sharp line. But it's...
Yeah. So I know I was drawn to the Pyrenees Mountains for some reason, and I didn't know why, but I went on a journey from basically Barcelona up to the Pyrenees, the Basque country, because I was very intrigued by the Basque country, because there was, where I grew up in Bakersfield, there was a lot of Basque, and I really enjoyed their food, but something was just drawing me there. But when we got to the Basque country up in San Sebastian, I didn't realize that their actual symbol for the Basque is like the Celtic clover. And there was a lot of Celts that came into the Basque and built ships. They were like a huge shipbuilding. So, you know, the idea, and then the, you know, these, like you were saying, from the Pyrenees and from France and these areas where they came up or came down into it, you see this Celtic influence in the Basque country, which not as, you know, is, even though they're aware of it, the Basque are aware of it. Not many people talk about it.
It's interesting.
I think there's a Christ consciousness that's also connected to both.
Mm-hmm. Well, that would be what we call the Buddhic plane, right? That's the thing that we talked about, whether it be Buddha or Christ. The Christ was the last incarnation within the Buddhic plane of that consciousness. So that does go out and throughout all these cosmologies. Any more questions or comments? All right, so let's get started with the study. Hopefully we have a good background now in some of these planes, and we can, because that's what we're going to talk about within these two paths, which is these planes. This is called the two paths. Passing from our consideration of the nature of the astral plane, so we've just talked about the astral plane, which is above the physical plane and below the mental plane, we will deal with its functions and the relation of the disciple to its activities. Let us remember certain things about it. First, it is preeminently the battleground. The battleground we talked about last week. And on its fought the warfare which eventuates in the final release of the imprisoned soul. It is useful to have in mind the outstanding characteristics of the three planes and the three bodies which function on them. So again, we're going to cover now Bailey's ideas from the Treatise on White Magic, her concepts of these three planes that we covered in some of the drawings. The physical plane is a plane of active experience in and through matter. It is a plane of externalization. This is what Russell would call our projection screen. We're projecting on the physical plane. And according to the condition and point of development of the inner man. So according to the condition and the point of development. So this is where we get into right thinking, right thought. What is our mind like? Is our mind turbulent? You know, is it calm? Is it holy? When I mean holy, I mean, is it seeing the world as one, or is it seeing it as desperate and disparate and of many? So as we begin to project onto this plane, it is according to the condition and point of view of our inner self. So what we project has a direct correlation to our inner self. So will be the outer form and its activities. So the very bottom we talked about was the physical plane, which is the root chakra, or is red, and the color that in most drawings that we see. The next plane that we talked about was the astral plane. It's the plane wherein the man passes through three stages of consciousness. And we talked a little bit about that with these three stages also. A, he gains through his sensory apparatus consciousness in the world of forms and develops ability to react to those forms with wisdom and intelligence. This consciousness he shares with the animal world, though he goes far beyond them in some respects, owing to his own possession of a correlating and coordinating mind. So this would be what Walter Russell would call our instinctual self. Just as animals have, this is our animal bodies. This is what all animals have in common with us. But man is more than just an animal body, right? We are a body, but we also have these other aspects. So at the very first we go through is this animal consciousness in the world of forms, which when we talk about the world of forms is kind of the idea set forth in Platonic thought. If we read Plato and the idea of forms and archetypes and other things that we talk about. So within this lower world, the world of consciousness, we have the animal kingdom also. And as Bear Lando talked about, I think it was maybe a couple of weeks ago, that animals really are just some of our lower thought forms that we have manifested out. And So animals don't have their own individual souls. They have what you would call a group soul, where a dog doesn't see itself as an individual, but part of a pack or part of a whole group. Therefore, when you have animals and they don't feel like they're part of the pack, especially dogs, they don't do well. They become very schizophrenic and erotic. Not erotic, but irrational. You know.
That's just like humans, though.
Yeah.
Seems to me that when we're not together.
And then that's part of our animal soul. And that's one reason that when we have social distancing and things, it really affects our consciousness, because we can't really feed that part of us.
Well,
Unless,
and it's more than that, though. It's that how we've learned to not join with, the society, and keep away and have, a house for everybody's, each person.
correct.
I mean, that's how I see this. Only it's just an opinion, of course.
I think you're exactly right, Doug. Thank you. Okay, so then the next is a sensitivity or awareness of moods. So once we get out of this emotional body, right? I mean, out of our just physicality of our instinctual, then we begin to have, some people would call the etheric, this might be the etheric realm for some. Sensitivity of moods, emotions, and feelings, desires, and aspirations, which have their roots within him in the principle of self-consciousness, or in the Akamara principle, as the occultist who loves difficult phrases is apt to call it.
Yes.
This he shares in common with his fellow men. So, this is what we could call this etheric plane. And a lot of people say, that when you want to manifest, it really is dependent upon your mood and your emotional drive that you put within the manifestation of the thought form in the physical plane in existence. So we're actually getting into that. And so then the third would be the spiritual awareness or sensitiveness to the spiritual world. So once we move past just the physical into the emotional, we then become aware of the spiritual and the feeling aspect of the higher consciousness. This has its roots in the soul, presupposes the dominance of the mental nature. So we're presupposing that we have a dominance over the mental nature before we actually begin to get into these spiritual concepts. And in that faculty, which constitutes him a mystic. So the mystic, Steiner warned that if we did not actually have control of our mental capacities within the mental plane and began to grow within the sensitivity in the etheric plane, that would lead to issues for us. Therefore, we really had to engage the mental plane. And he called that the trap of the mystic, is when we got too much into just spirituality and did not really put any discernment from the mental plane within it. And then so with that, the awareness he shares in common with all disciples, and is the reward of the gained victories of his astral plane experience. So as we begin to understand that we have a physical body, that is not us, but that we do need that within the 3D existence, we then go into the etheric or the emotional bodies, where we have to learn sometimes some detachment. And through that detachment, that we don't always get so excited that we, I know for me that when I get enraged, I lose my mind totally, right? I cannot think at all. And so I have to be sure that I keep myself. I could be aware that other people are hurting. I can be aware of their emotions, but I can't become too empathetic with that, because then you will lose your ability to think properly. So within this body, we have to develop our ability to have mental awareness and mental cognitive in the mental plane. And that's what we're going to talk a bit about as we go forward within.
I think we also have to know that that's not us.
Mm-hmm.
That voice in your head sometimes. It's not you.
Yeah, and we have to discern between the mental plane and physical thinking. And this is what Walter Russell talks about quite a bit within that, that we have a mind that records information, and that's in our head, or it's in our thoughts, but those thoughts aren't us, that we are actually an intuitive being, and those thoughts are the thoughts that we need within the mental plane.
So
that requires,
what, excuse me?
Sorry. That is that what they speak about when they speak about developing quality of discernment, clear logic, and observational skills, as opposed to just going following the wind, going with your moods.
or even like say book knowledge, right? Where
Okay.
you may learn a lot of facts, right? Memorize a lot of things, but are those real to you? Have you experienced those things? Is that really what your intuition is telling you? So, Walter, I'm not saying that we can't look at books. I mean, we are here, correct? But whether or not, the history that we read, the concepts that we read, where you go through school and you're taught, something, that's not really what we're talking about here as the mental plane.
It's really
That
the
is-
intuitive part that speaks of these things, or
Yeah. It's
okay,
it's those things through the soul that we're running through the mental plane.
understood. Okay, yeah, that's actually quite clear then.
And what's his name? Walter Atkinson, I think. And he says that you have to put your higher self, or your, I guess, your soul, your heart space, in charge of the head. He says, take back the throne of your mind.
And that's what we're talking about, Doug. That's exactly what Alice is talking about right here. That we want to take back that throne, and that's why we have to make those differentiations between that knowledge mind, or what we, that learned mind, which is really an overlay. That's not really who we are. It's what we've been taught and read, and it's not our own experiences, our own intuitions, and it's in conflict with our solar self. So to get that soul back into that mental plane, but that only comes after we go through all of these battles, right, on the astral plane of all these different forces. And again, when I read Russell, this was the question I had. Yeah, I understand that, but we have all kinds of other forces coming in and ideas. I mean, there's a lot of things coming into our heads, different beings, different energies coming in. And discernment is the key, discernment of what's coming in. How do I interpolate what's being brought in, and what mechanism do I use? Well, you have to engage the soul in order to do that.
But sometimes you can't, though. That other thing, you think you can't, whatever you want to say, but that other thing is too powerful. And you think that's you, though. It even plays both sides of the conversation, and you think it's you.
Yeah, you have God and the devil on each shoulder.
Just like in the cartoons, yes. Yes.
So any more comments before I move on to the next slide? All right. So now we're going to get into the mental plane, and the mental plane comes next. In it, the right use of the intellect is the outstanding achievement, the right use of the intellect. This is also characterized by 3 stages. So the first stage is wherein the mind is the receiver of impressions from the outer world. So this is where we have the polarity of we have messages that are coming in from the outside, via these forms and these colors, and via the 5 senses in the brain. So this is what Walter Russell talked about as we use the brain and our sensing bodies, and we bring in these images, and those images get recorded in our brain. And oftentimes we have those images recorded in our brain, we no longer use our intuition. We just fall back into an unconscious being, pulling forth from previous experience rather than actually learning new things. And so we think we can guess what's next. Like every disclaimer on any financial statement says, past performance doesn't guarantee future performance, right? Well, then why would we use past performance in our head to predict future performance for anything, right? It doesn't work. You really can't do it, even though we think we can.
It's also not past performance. It's what you think is past performance.
Exactly. And it's just from one perspective, and so we make up all kinds of ideas of why this happened, why that happened, when it probably has nothing to do with any of it. So this is a negative condition, and in it, the modifications of the thinking principle are brought about through the impacts of the external world and the reactions of the astral world. So what we're saying here, that as we begin, whatever's happening within our astral plane, whichever's happening in our dreams and in our thought forms and in this area of the astral plane, this is where we begin to make these modifications of the thinking principle. The stage wherein the mind initiates its own activities and wherein the intellect is a dominating factor. Though thrown into activity by the factors enumerated above, it is responsive also to the thought currents of the mental plane as well. and becomes exceedingly active as a result of these two contacts. Out of these, a third activity supervenes, wherein the reasoning principle acts upon the information gained in these two ways, sets its own streams of thoughts, and formulates its own thought forms, as well as registering those of others. So what we're
I
saying
think
here,
that's clairvoyance.
correct. It's clairvoyance when we register the thoughts of others also, which means that we all are one. We all have these energies and thought forms coming in, and we have our own. But it's often hard to say what is self and what is other, because all these thoughts are coming in. This is where discernment comes into play. This is where know thyself becomes the important rule of the day. And in order to do this, we actually have to spend some time doing some inner work so that we can begin to know thyself, so we can begin to discern our thought forms, our knowing, our intuitions and things that are happening also, and not just our sensing body recalling and regurgitating what's been programmed into us, but we're actually using our minds to provide new thought forms and discernment and wisdom through what we're seeing and manifesting. The stage wherein the soul, through concentration and meditation, succeeds in imposing its ideas and impressions upon the mind, held steady in the light, and so enables the mental body to respond to impression and contacts emanating from the subjective and spiritual worlds. So what this is saying now, we are beginning to understand that we have these subtle bodies. We begin to understand there are these different realms. They are bringing forth messages through our soul, and we are no longer just relying on the physical impressions that our eyes and our five senses are receiving. This again is what William James called radical empiricism, where we're using more than just the physical to make decisions and to formulate ideas and thought forms, because we are now aware that we do have other energies and bodies that affect what we manifest and what we think. Yet the battle par excellence is fought out in the astral body, and only reaches its most intense point and its potential fierceness when there is a good physical instrument and a well-equipped mentality. So we remember how we got back to this last week, where we were talking about that this is our machine. This is our projector machine. This is our creative machine. This is how we project thought forms out. It's our body. If it's not working correctly, we may get skewed images coming out if we're not healthy, if we don't engage in the right practices. What we put forth is much different. And then once our mental capacities are diminished or clouded by our own desires and say emotions that may not be beneficial, such as greed, lust, these kind of things, our projector is not in working order. But this all plays out on the astral. The greater sensitivity of the astral body, the greater its reaction to the physical world and to the mental condition, and hence the fact emerges that disciples and the more highly evolved people in the world have a more potent astral body and work under greater emotional strain than the less highly evolved and liberated sons of God. So that as we begin to engage our astral body, we may see that we have more dreams. That we begin to actually have a richer life in our dream states, and that we can begin to do things in our dream states that we never thought possible before, because we are now beginning to develop that astral body and beginning to actually become sensitive to these other energies that are coming forth, and not just relying on the physical that we have for so many years in the past. So students, okay, so go ahead, Matthew.
No, it's just as we are reading this, it feels very much like that is our natural state, but it's just overcast with a lot of the mess of the practical daily life. Because somehow when you were reading this also, and I read it, but it didn't come in as well as when I hear it. It's much like I'm being pulled back and forward between these things. And this is still very new, like underdeveloped, but it was always intuitively there. Like I knew it is there. And I know this is normal without having the correct words for it, but some sensation. And somehow, yeah, our upbringing, our traumas, our the mess in our heads is getting us out of that. But this is, but it also says then that as you get better in it, you get more work to do also, because more deeper layers of this overcast has to be worked with and dealt with and processed.
And, you know, as I've said before, in past cultures, in the previous cultures, they actually saw the astral life as the real life. And that this, you know, physical was the illusion, as Walter Russell talks about. So as, you know, as we begin to actually realize and accept that we do have these subtle bodies, we will then actually begin to realize that we do live in other worlds also that are just as real as this world to us in many ways. And the work, you know, I was joking with, I think it was Grant the other, you know, day, and I'm saying, yeah, instead of saying good night when I go to bed, I say I'm going to work. Because there is work that can be done at night in our sleep. So students are therefore begged to deal drastically and potently with the emotional natures, remembering that victory descends from above and cannot be worked up from below. The soul must govern, and its instrument in the warfare is the consecrated mind. Again, getting back to what Doug was talking about here, where we begin to take control of that mind through the soul. It is interesting to note the occult sequence and description given of this plane in the rule under consideration. So what we're talking about here is that in order to actually manifest the white magic we're talking about through the solar angel, we need to develop ourselves on the mental plane. And many of us don't do that. We still stay within the thinking mind that Walter Russell talks about, which is on the physical level, and we don't really develop the capabilities that we have on our mental plane. Now, I did we did a discussion on the archetype ruler in biogeometry. I don't know if people remember that or not, where I had the different planes of nature that Ibrahim Karim's talks about, and using the pendulum and so on, you can actually find out where issues reside, which subtle body issues reside. And what Ibrahim Karim has said is that from all the years he has done this, he finds that the most issues are in the mental plane. That most of these physical issues that we're experiencing aren't really physical, but actually have their root in the mental plane. Any more questions about the mental plane before we move on?
That's the same as the German New Medicine.
In a sense, but it is the German New Medicine may not go far enough. It's saying that, and I would say that the German New Medicine is still in the ideas of the astral, and to identify that they are coming in from a higher source and that there's trauma based. Once you begin to deal with them, once you begin to actually, you know, look for the solution, then you'd have to go into the mental plane to do that.
What I'm finding when I worked with, and I'm still working with natural doctors, homeopath, and when we talk about, let's say, some mental stuff that I was concerned about or some situation, it's like peeling an onion. And it was interesting how I could find that some of these emotions were like large in a certain part of my body, like the bottom of my leg, or so it's but you're right. As we were peeling, if you like, we would eventually get to what happened in some situation that I got this idea in my head. And it was very interesting once you start discussing and you realize, oh, and you know, you reflect on it, you realize how it has formed you all this time, eh?
Mhm.
And once you identify it or work on it, whatever, then wow, it's so much more freedom, you know.
Mhm.
So I think all these new doctors that we're having, like be it the ones with tuning forks, and
Mhm.
you know, I think it's wow, it's really gonna help us. I mean, even though you know, I'm sure it existed in another form with
Mhm.
Chinese medicine and all this, but we're getting there because a lot of us are more mental now. The whole humanity is more mental, you know.
But again, we have to discern between mental brain versus intuitive thought and the mental plane.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way we can do that is once we become soul aware. So if you have a physical materialist, right, who doesn't have any belief in any spiritual or subtle bodies or different differentiation, he's in his head, but he's not in the right mental plane. He's still in his physical thinking. And so the discernment between that physical thinking, which is mostly book learning and so on, versus the experience of in the mental plane where we're actually getting some knowing, as I think Matthew was talking about earlier, as you get out on the land and maybe begin to experience some things and begin to see the animals and then realize that they're your thought forms. I mean, this is stuff that as you begin to do this, it's going to open up new worlds for you and a new way of thinking that is going to really begin to open up new areas of your brain and of your subtle bodies once you become aware of them and then begin to see these occurrences, as manifestations through your soul self. It may even change what you see and the reactions of those other beings to you.
And I've been also reading some other material on harmonious magic or white magic and things like that. And they speak a lot about, especially in the beginning stages, about exercises where, for example, during meditation, you try to visualize yourself, watching yourself as you do it. And as they say, it helps the mind to let go of the idea that it's only one physical body and that there are more aspects and that you open your mind for that possibility. Does that hook in also here? I think so.
Well, yes. I mean, when I was talking with Bear, he asked one of the things that we talked about was, where does the consciousness reside? And so many of us think it is in the head, but it really is in the auric field, everything that surrounds us. And so if we think we're meditating and, we're meditating in the brain that's sitting there, that may not be the correct way to look. But as we begin to move out into our, they call it cosmic intelligence, cosmic consciousness, whatever you want to call it, as you begin to move out of your body and begin to look back on your avatar, that's where you really begin to understand that you're a soul and not a energy body sheathed in food. That this higher consciousness is really where we're at. And then that's kind of the idea of holiness, that I've accepted, is that holiness is not that you're a good person and you don't drink, that's not holy, is that you see everything.
That you're whole, as in WHOL.
Correct. That you're whole. And once you put a H in front of it, now you're a whole, right? Which means that there's nothing in it, right? So you want to be holy, not HOL, right? You want to be
WHOLL.
Right? To where you see everything as one, that we are all a part. We don't want to be the void in the ground.
That's where these exercises come in. Makes sense.
Fun.
Okay, so we're going to continue here on the two paths. We're going to talk a little bit about Russell as we get into these two paths also. So this is the mental path continued. It is the first of all the plane of dual forces. Who talks about dual forces? Of course, our buddy Walter. The first thing the astronaut becomes aware of is duality. What is duality? It's two separate poles, positive, negative. Is one better or worse than the other? They're both the same. They both have charge. They're both required. But this is how we manifest. As Walter Russell said, we have these two poles that have the centering, and each thing comes off of it. These are diagrams from Walter Russell's magnetic model. Here's his diagram of the one, where we have the forces, the radiation and gravitation coming in, going out. Both are charged, but both, one is positive and one is negative, equal but in opposite force. So this is within the ideas of Walter Russell, the ideas of duality, the ideas of manifesting in the physical. The little evolved man is aware of synthesis, but it is the synthesis of the material nature. That's all it is. It's all he can be aware of, is that mental nature of that lower body. The highly spiritual man is aware also of synthesis, but in that is his soul. So this is where we're getting now. This is the difference between white and black magic, whose consciousness is that of unity, back to wholeness. Unity and wholeness, in my opinion, are the same concepts. We are all whole. We are all part of the greater. We are not separate. We are not. It is not me and other. It is just me. It is not me and them. It is us and we. That is the idea of the soul, of the wholeness and of unity. But in between is the wretched aspirant, which means the unholy or wicked aspirant, conscious of duality above all else, and pulled hither and thither between the two. So the idea is that once we become an aspirant, we become aware that there is duality. We don't seek wholeness. We vacillate between the two, which I think all of us are going to do as we, I don't think that we're ever, complete, but the idea is that we are working toward, being positive rather than perfection.
Yeah, I'm pretty wretched.
I think we can all fall in that category pretty much. His first step, well, I think it's just that we're on our path, right? When we use words like wretched, good, bad, like I said,
right.
That's kind of, you're getting back in duality and out of wholeness, right? So
just all that stuff.
Yeah. So the idea is that we are where we're supposed to be, but we want to move into a higher thought form, into our souls and out of our bodies. And that's what, that's our desire. And hopefully with our desire, we can begin to manifest. So his first step has for its objective to make him aware of the pairs of opposites and the necessity to choose between them. Through the light, which he has discovered in himself, he becomes aware of the dark. I've spoken before that Jung said that Christians had made Jesus so bright that Satan had to be so dark, because whatever we have has to balance also. So that as we begin to see the light, that the brighter we may think we are, sometimes the darker the other side may become, in order to seek that equilibrium and balance. Through the good which attracts him, he sees the evil which is from him the line of least resistance. Through the activity of pain, he can visualize and become aware of pleasure, and heaven and hell become to him realities. Through the activity of the attractive life of his soul, he realizes the attraction of matter and of form, and is forced to recognize the urge and pull of both of them. He learns to feel himself as pendant twixt the two greater forces. And once the dualities are grasped, it dawns on him slowly and surely that the deciding factor in the struggle is his divine will. So within this, we begin to understand that it is our divine will that will push us in either direction that we wish, in contradiction to his selfish will. So if we want to go to a higher soul self, we use divine will. If we want to go to the lower personality self, we use selfish will. Thus, the dual forces play their part until they are seen as two great streams of divine energy pulling in opposite directions, and he becomes then aware of the two paths. So these are the two paths that we're discussing here. This is the whole crux of a lot of this talk, is really, is it divine will or is it selfish will that I live in? That's really the two paths, because one is the soul, one is the personality. So are where the two mentioned in our rule. One path leads back into the dreary land of rebirth, and the other leads through the golden gates of the city of free souls. So this is kind of talking about incarnations, right? Reincarnations. And if we continue to live in the personality, we will keep coming back until we actually learn to live in the soul.
It's like the path of the Jedi in Star Wars.
Correct.
And there's a lot of power also in our dark sides. I noticed the dark in us. It's very powerful, and I think that has a place in certain. It has a use and a place, but yeah, it's can be scary. Also, I noticed.
Well,
to meet yourself there.
Within the physical world, the dark side has very much power, right? Because that's where it dwells. It's dwelling in the personality. Yeah. It's dwelling in the physical. And if if you're dealing in that world and you don't understand that there's people often ask, like, what do I think we need to do in this time? There's all this stuff going on, right? All these armies going to come after us. Well, I don't think that our answers in the physicals, in the physical realm.
No, I also don't think that.
Because that's where the dark has its greatest benefit, right? That's where the dark really has most of its strength. Unless we can get out of that thinking, right, and begin to move into these higher bodies, into the mental bodies, into the spiritual bodies, begin to invoke the other powers that are out there, and not to try to concentrate only within the Mars mentality of the body or of the force or whatever. That is when we can actually begin to manifest and disseminate those other thought forms that are out there and begin to create new ones.
This path is a dreary land, as it says here.
Yep, exactly.
Would you say this is similar to the idea that basically you have the choice between the path of the mystic versus the magician? Well, I've seen that in some other books, but
no, basically the magician path is actually a higher path than the mystic, because
it's more about being in control of it versus just letting it come over you.
Correct. And the mystic is aware of these, right? And he's aware that, but once you become the magician, it's then what path do you choose? The personality.
Understood. Yeah.
Right? Are you a black magician or a white magician? This is what this is about. Because not everybody can even get to the path of the mystic, right? They can't get to the path of understanding that there's a spiritual realm or these higher bodies. Okay, once you get there, once you get to the astral plane, right?
Then you have the other options.
What is your choice, right? What is the path you're going to take once we get to that astral plane, right? Once we actually understand that and can operate in that. Understood.
Oh, interesting. Now I understand that book also completely different. Oh, thanks.
Okay. I'll
read it again.
One is therefore involuntary and involves him in the deepest matter, right? The other leads him out of the body nature. So the one is like, this is what Walter Russell, would call the unaware man. It's what Jung would call the unconscious, right? That we're doing things out of the just instinct, that we're just living a program life. We just get up, do everything because that's what our body does. We have no intention. We're not trying to manifest. We don't sit down and have any intentionality in what we do. It's just like, this is what my body wants to eat, I eat. I don't have any intentionality in whatever it is, right? So as we begin to do this, this is involuntary and involves him in the deepest matter. So this is like within Steiner, within the Ahrimanic A-sphere ideas, that as you go farther, deeper into matter, this is the concept of Ahriman. The other leads him out of the body nature and makes him eventually aware of his spiritual body, through which he can function in the kingdom of the soul. So now once we become aware of the spiritual body, that actually opens us up now to become part of the kingdom of the soul. One path later on, when he is a true and pledged Shila, which is kind of it means that you actually are following a master, is known to him as the left-hand personality, left-hand path, and the other path of right activity. On one path, he becomes proficient in black magic. This is what we were talking about, right? This is
the left-hand path, I think.
Yeah, this is the Sith, right? In the Jedi, this is the Sith. This is, that whole dark side. that they talk about. This is that side, which is only the developed powers of the personality. Again, back to the definition, this is just reiterating what we talked about earlier. Subordinated to the selfish purposes of a man whose motives are those of self-interest and worldly ambition. These confine him to the three worlds and shut the door which opens to life. On the other path, he subordinates his personality and exercises the magic of the white brotherhood, working always in the light of the soul, with the soul in all forms, and laying no emphasis upon the ambitions of the personal self. Clear discrimination of these two paths reveals what is called in some occult books that narrow razor edge path, which lies between the two. This is the noble middle path. And this noble middle path is talked about in Rosicrucianism, it's talked about in Christianity. This is that path that narrow is the gate and narrow is the path. And those, who find it are few and far in between, right? Because this is a narrow path that we're talking about here.
That also means then if you're on that path, you can work on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Well,
or at least interact and do your work while interacting with both sides.
Exactly. But to being aware that, the detriments that follow on the side of the personality and the rewards that are on the side of the soul. So, be very, like it says, and like whenever you invoke magic, black magic, there's always a price to be paid. And more than when you do this, the soul magic, you don't have a debt that you're incurring. So
you're more with the flow of nature, and then in abundance, it will always be supported.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
And that's what, we can get into other things like when Solomon, when you read the grimoires and Solomon who invokes the aid of demons, right, to control them. That's a really sketchy area because you're using dark forces to gain whatever selfish means.
Yeah, right? And you don't know the price.
Yeah, and you don't know the price, correct. Subordinate selfish person of man. Okay. On the other path, he's subordinate person and exercises the magic of the white brotherhood, working always in the light of the soul, with the soul in all forms, and laying no emphasis upon the ambitions of the personal self. Clear discrimination of these two paths reveals what is called some call books the razor's edge. This is the noble middle path of the Buddha. And that on the Buddhic plane is what we talked about. The Buddhic plane is also the Christ plane. This is the energy of that Christ consciousness, that middle path, which holds both the dark and the light intention, which stands between the two. And that's what we would call the middle path. And marks the fine line between the pairs of opposites and between the two streams, which he has learnt to recognize, one going up onto the gates of heaven and the other passing down into the innermost hell.
Well, back to that picture.
Yeah.
The Walter Russell picture at the top.
Yeah, this one.
That the S, is that the middle path they were talking about?
Correct. That is that as we looked at, this is like, this is the path that is the 0 point, right? We never actually get there because we always pass through it. But the idea is that as we do our incarnations, as we do our different, that we pass through the 0 path, and that may be actually the portal to the next our next incarnation and where we incarnate at. It could.
That's like the razor edge.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Okay.
You're all tugged from one side to the other.
Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to stop here for today. We're going to might have a part 3 next, but I think it was good. I think we had good discussion, and I wanted to cover a lot of the aspects that we covered too. I think there's been some nice threads woven here. So any questions before I sign off? Comments? Okay. So this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River Valley. Please like and subscribe, and thanks to everybody in the Walter Russell Secret of Light group. We love it. We love the input. We love that you're here, and please keep coming. And we will see you not next week, because next week I'll be at Bear Lando's at the Sovereignty seminar that's going on up there. And so we'll be probably missing that one, and we'll be meeting in 2 weeks. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Matthew, for coming all the way from the Netherlands to see us. I appreciate it. And
Thank you, Will.
we will hopefully get this up here if I can. Come on, there we go. Oh, come on. And I will be signing off. So thank you all again, and please like and subscribe.